My name is Emma, and I'm about to tell you the most insane wedding story you've ever heard. Picture this. I'm standing at the altar in my dream wedding dress, looking into the eyes of the man I thought I'd spend forever with, when my best friend drops a bomb that changes everything. But here's the twist. I was ready for it. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Church. 200 guests filled every pew, their faces glowing with excitement. My dress was perfect, flowing white silk with tiny pearls sewn into the bodice. I had dreamed of this moment since I was a little girl playing dress-up in my mom's closet. Jake stood beside me in his black tuxedo, looking handsome as always. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and that charming smile that made me fall in love with him 3 years ago was plastered across his face. The pastor had just asked us to share our personal vows, and my heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. "Emma," Jake began, his voice smooth and confident, "you are the light of my life, the woman who makes me want to be better every single day." I smiled back at him, but something felt different. Maybe it was the way his eyes kept darting to my maid of honor, Melissa, who stood just 3 feet away from us. Or maybe it was the strange text message I'd received that morning from my brother David. "Trust me, Em, everything will make sense soon." As Jake continued his vows, talking about love and commitment and forever, I noticed Melissa shifting nervously behind me. She looked stunning in her deep blue bridesmaid dress, her blonde hair curled perfectly around her shoulders. We'd been best friends since college, roommates for 2 years, and I'd trusted her with all my secrets. "I promise to love you through good times and bad," Jake was saying, "to be faithful and honest, to support your dreams and—" "Stop." The single word cut through the church like a knife. Every head turned toward Melissa, who had stepped forward with a smirk on her face that I'd never seen before. The church fell completely silent. Even the birds outside seemed to stop chirping. "I'm sorry, Emma," Melissa said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "But I can't let this continue." My stomach dropped, but I didn't move. I just stared at her, waiting for whatever bomb she was about to drop. "Jake and I have been seeing each other for months," she announced, her chin raised high like she was proud of what she was saying. "And I'm pregnant with his child." The church erupted. Gasps echoed off the walls. Someone's grandmother actually screamed. I heard my mom cry out, "Oh my God," from the front row. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up to get a better view of the drama unfolding at the altar. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't even look surprised. Instead, I turned slowly toward the large projection screen that Mrs. Chen, our videographer, had set up behind the altar. She was supposed to show a slideshow of our relationship during the reception, but I had other plans. "Actually, Melissa," I said, my voice calm and steady, "I have something to show everyone too." Jake's face went white. "Emma, what are you doing?" I walked over to Mrs. Chen and nodded. She pressed a button on her laptop and the screen flickered to life. The entire church turned to look at what was about to play. "You see," I said, facing the crowd of shocked wedding guests, "I've known about your little secret for weeks, and I've been planning my own surprise." Melissa's smirk disappeared. Jake started backing away from the altar. The church was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "What do you think was on that screen?" Drop your guesses in the comments below. Was it photos, videos, or something even more shocking? And make sure you're subscribed because this story is about to get absolutely wild. The video began to play, and what appeared on that screen would leave everyone in that church shaking with disbelief. 6 months earlier, my life felt like a fairy tale. I was sitting across from Jake at Romano's, our favorite Italian restaurant, watching him fidget with his napkin in a way that was completely unlike his usual confident self. The candlelight flickered between us, casting dancing shadows on his nervous face. "Emma," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "These past 3 years with you have been the best of my life." I squeezed his fingers, feeling butterflies in my stomach. Something big was happening, and I could sense it in the air like electricity before a storm. "You make me laugh when I'm sad. You believe in me when I don't believe in myself, And you love me in a way I never thought I deserved, Jake continued, his voice getting stronger with each word. Then he did it. He got down on one knee right there in the middle of the restaurant, pulling out a small velvet box that made my heart stop beating for a full second. Emma Rodriguez, will you marry me? The ring was perfect, a simple diamond solitaire that caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. I said yes before he even finished asking, and the entire restaurant burst into applause. The elderly couple at the next table started crying happy tears, and our waiter brought us free champagne. That night, I called everyone I knew. My mom screamed so loud through the phone that Jake could hear her from across the room. My dad got all emotional and started talking about how proud he was of the woman I'd become. But when I called my older brother David, his reaction was different. "That's great, Em," he said, but his voice sounded flat. "Really happy for you." "You don't sound happy," I pointed out, twirling the ring around my finger for the 100th time that evening. "I just want to make sure you really know this guy," David said carefully. "You've only been together 3 years, and marriage is a big step." I rolled my eyes. David had always been overprotective ever since our dad had his heart attack when I was 16. He thought it was his job to shield me from everything bad in the world. "I know Jake better than I know myself," I told him. "He's kind, he's successful, he makes me laugh, and he loves me. What more could I want?" 2 weeks later, I brought Jake to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Mom had made her famous lasagna, and Dad was showing off his new barbecue grill in the backyard. Everything should have been perfect, but I noticed David watching Jake like a hawk the entire evening. During dinner, Jake told funny stories about his real estate clients and complimented Mom's cooking. He seemed relaxed and charming, just like always. But when Jake went to the bathroom, David leaned over to me. "Something's off about him," he whispered. "What are you talking about?" I whispered back, glancing toward the hallway to make sure Jake wasn't coming back yet. He told 3 different stories about how he got into real estate. First, he said his dad inspired him. Then he said he fell into it by accident. Then he said he'd always dreamed of it since college. I shook my head. "You're being paranoid. People tell stories differently depending on their audience. And did you notice he doesn't have any photos of family or old friends on his phone? When he was showing us pictures of houses he sold, I didn't see a single personal photo." "Maybe he's just private," I said. But a tiny seed of doubt planted itself in my mind. When Jake came back, he slid his arm around my shoulders and kissed my temple. "Your family is amazing, babe. I can't wait to officially be part of it." Mom beamed at him. Dad nodded approvingly, but David just kept watching with those suspicious eyes. Later that night, as Jake and I planned our engagement party, I pushed David's concerns out of my head. I was in love with a wonderful man who wanted to spend his life with me. My brother was just being overprotective like always. I started planning the wedding the very next day, choosing Melissa as my maid of honor because she'd been my best friend through everything. She squealed with excitement when I asked her and immediately started talking about dress shopping and bachelorette parties. Everything felt perfect and magical, like all my dreams were finally coming true. If only I had listened to David's warnings. 3 months before the wedding, the first crack appeared in my perfect fairy tale, and it came in the form of a phone call at 2 a.m. I woke up to Jake's phone buzzing on the nightstand. He was sleeping deeply beside me, but the bright screen kept flashing in the dark room. I reached over to turn it off, not wanting to wake him, when I saw the name on the screen. Victoria, work. Who calls about work at 2 a.m.? I gently shook Jake's shoulder. "Babe, your phone," I whispered. Jake's eyes snapped open instantly, like he'd been waiting for something. He grabbed the phone and looked at the screen, his face changing in a way I'd never seen before. "I have to take this," he said, jumping out of bed and walking toward the bathroom. "Emergency with a client." I heard him talking in hushed tones behind the closed door, but I couldn't make out the words. When he came back 15 minutes later, I was still awake. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just a crazy client having second thoughts about $1 million purchase," he said, sliding back into bed. "You know how rich people can be." But something in his voice didn't sound right. Jake was usually so confident when he talked about work, but now he seemed nervous, almost scared. The next morning, I mentioned it to Melissa over coffee at our favorite cafe downtown. We were supposed to be looking at centerpiece ideas for the reception, but I couldn't focus on flowers and candles. Maybe he's just stressed about the wedding, Melissa suggested, stirring sugar into her latte. Men get weird when big life changes are coming up. But it wasn't wedding stress, I said. It was something else. And who was Victoria? I've never heard him mention anyone named Victoria at his office. Melissa's hand paused for just a second while stirring her coffee, but then she smiled at me. You're overthinking this. Jake loves you. He proposed to you. He's planning a life with you. Don't let your imagination run wild. She was right, I told myself. I was being paranoid just like David had been at dinner, but then more strange things started happening. Jake began working late almost every night. When I'd call his office, his assistant would say he'd already left, but he wouldn't come home until after 10. When I asked him about it, he'd say he was showing houses to clients who could only meet after regular business hours. The real estate market is crazy right now, he'd explain, loosening his tie and heading straight for the shower. Everyone wants to buy, so I have to work when they're available. Then there was the earring. I found it in his car when I was looking for my sunglasses. A small silver hoop with a tiny diamond. Definitely not mine. I wore gold jewelry and I'd never owned anything that delicate. When I showed it to Jake, he barely glanced at it. "Oh, that must be from Mrs. Patterson," he said casually. "She's this elderly client who's been looking at condos. She probably dropped it when I was driving her around last week." It seemed reasonable, but something about how quickly he had an answer bothered me. Melissa was becoming more involved in the wedding planning too, which should have made me happy. She had opinions about everything: the flowers, the music, the seating arrangements. She even suggested I change my dress to something more flattering. "That style makes you look a little wide in the hips," she said when we were at the bridal shop for my final fitting. "Maybe something with a different cut?" The seamstress looked confused. "But miss, this dress fits her perfectly. She looks beautiful." Melissa just shrugged. "I'm just trying to help her look her best on her big day." David called me every few days asking casual questions about Jake. Where was he working? Had I met his family? Did I know anything about his life before we met? "Why are you interrogating me about my fiancé?" I finally asked him during one of these calls. "I'm not interrogating you," David said. "I'm just trying to get to know the guy who's going to be my brother-in-law." But I could hear something else in his voice. Suspicion, worry. Like he knew something I didn't. 2 months before the wedding, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to stop doubting the man I loved and start trusting my heart instead of my fears. I had no idea that my heart was about to be shattered into a million pieces. 2 months before my wedding, while I was busy choosing between roses and peonies for my bouquet, my maid of honor and my fiancé were starting something that would destroy everything I believed about love and friendship. It began at my birthday party in March. I had thrown a small celebration at my apartment, just close friends, family, and Jake. I was in the kitchen cutting my cake when I noticed Jake and Melissa talking quietly by the balcony door. They looked serious, almost intimate. But when I walked over with cake slices, they immediately stepped apart. "What are you two plotting?" I asked with a laugh, handing them each a plate. "Just discussing bachelor and bachelorette party ideas," Melissa said quickly, her cheeks slightly pink. "We want to make sure they're both amazing." Jake nodded, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Melissa has some great ideas for my bachelor party. She really knows what guys like." I thought it was sweet that they were getting along so well. After all, they were the two most important people in my life. I wanted them to be friends. What I didn't know was that Jake had pulled Melissa aside that night with a different agenda entirely. "I need to talk to someone who really knows Emma," he had told her. "I want to make sure I'm the husband she deserves. Can we meet for coffee sometime?" I could use advice from her best friend. Melissa later told me she should have said no. She should have seen through his manipulation. But she was flattered that Jake valued her opinion, and she agreed to meet him the following week. Their first coffee meeting lasted 3 hours. Jake was charming, asking thoughtful questions about what made me happy, what my dreams were, how to be the best partner for me. Melissa felt important, like she was helping to create the perfect marriage for her best friend. Emma is so lucky to have someone who cares this much, she told him as they walked to their cars. I'm the lucky one, Jake replied, then paused. You know, Melissa, you're an amazing friend. Emma doesn't realize how much you do for her. That comment planted a seed. Melissa had always felt like she lived in my shadow. I got the promotions at work, I got the perfect boyfriend, I got the fairy tale proposal. For once, someone was noticing her value. Their second meeting happened when I was working late on a big marketing campaign. Jake texted Melissa saying he needed urgent advice about surprising me with something special. They met at a wine bar downtown, and Jake ordered a bottle of expensive red wine. I want to plan something romantic for Emma, but I need a woman's perspective, he said, leaning closer across the small table. What would make her feel truly special? As the wine flowed, their conversation shifted from me to more personal topics. Jake asked about Melissa's job, her dreams, her dating life. He listened intently when she talked about feeling overlooked and underappreciated. You're incredible, Melissa, he said, his hand briefly touching hers across the table. Any guy would be lucky to have you. Melissa felt a flutter in her stomach that she tried to ignore. This was Emma's fiancé, her best friend's future husband. But Jake was looking at her like she was the most fascinating woman in the world. By their third meeting, the pretense of discussing me had almost completely disappeared. They were meeting because they enjoyed each other's company. Jake would text her during the day, asking about her meetings, remembering details about her life that even I sometimes forgot. You get me in a way most people don't, Melissa told him one evening as they walked through the park near her apartment. I feel the same way, Jake replied, stopping under a streetlight. You're so different from other women I know. That's when he kissed her. Melissa knew it was wrong. She knew she was betraying me in the worst possible way. But Jake made her feel special, chosen, desired in a way she'd never experienced before. Emma doesn't have to know. Jake whispered against her lips. This is just between us. Something beautiful and separate from everything else. And so began the affair that would eventually destroy my wedding day. While I was at home planning our future, picking out flowers and tasting cakes, the two people I trusted most were building a secret relationship based on lies and betrayal. The worst part? I had no idea that my perfect world was crumbling right beneath my feet. 1 month before my wedding, while I was addressing invitations and confirming catering details, my brother David was uncovering secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about the man I was about to marry. It started when David hired a private investigator named Marcus to do a background check on Jake. I would have been furious if I'd known, but David couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong with my fiancé. I need you to dig deep, David told Marcus over coffee at a diner downtown. Employment history, financial records, past relationships, everything. What Marcus found was disturbing. Jake's real estate license had been suspended twice for fraudulent practices. He'd been selling properties he didn't have legal authority to sell, pocketing deposits from buyers, and disappearing when deals fell through. The successful real estate agent I was marrying was actually drowning in debt and facing potential criminal charges. But that wasn't the worst part. Marcus discovered that Jake had a pattern with women, 3 previous relationships, all with successful women who had money or family wealth. Each relationship followed the same script: charm them, propose quickly, gain access to their finances, then disappear when things got complicated. Your sister fits his type perfectly, Marcus told David, sliding a folder across the table. Marketing manager at a successful company, family with money, trusting personality. She's exactly what he's looking for. David's hands shook as he opened the folder and saw photos of Jake with other women, copies of fraudulent contracts, and bank records showing massive debts to some very dangerous people. Meanwhile, Mrs. Chen, our wedding videographer, was having her own discoveries. She'd been filming at the venue for another wedding when she saw Jake and Melissa together in the parking lot. At first, she thought they were just discussing wedding details, but something about their body language seemed off. She kept filming from a distance, not really thinking about it. When she reviewed the footage later, she was shocked by what she saw. Jake had Melissa pressed against his car, kissing her passionately. Their hands were all over each other, and they were clearly not discussing flower arrangements. Mrs. Chen had filmed weddings for 15 years, and she'd seen her share of drama. But this was different. This was a bride's best friend and fiancé betraying her just weeks before the wedding. She struggled with what to do. Should she tell me? Should she mind her own business? Finally, she decided to reach out to David, whose number she had from the wedding planning contacts. "I have something you need to see," she told him over the phone. "It's about your sister's wedding." When David saw the footage, everything clicked into place. Jake wasn't just a fraud. He was cheating on me with my own maid of honor. David and Mrs. Chen met at a coffee shop to plan their next move. "We have to tell Emma," Mrs. Chen said, her laptop open between them, showing the damning footage. "She won't believe us," David replied, running his hands through his hair. "She's so in love with him, and she trusts Melissa completely. If we show her this now, she'll think we're trying to sabotage her happiness." "So what do we do?" David thought for a moment. "We gather more evidence, everything we can find, and we wait for the right moment to expose it all." While they were planning, Melissa was dealing with her own crisis. She'd missed her period and taken 3 pregnancy tests, all positive. She was carrying Jake's baby. Instead of feeling scared or guilty, Melissa felt triumphant. This was her chance to win Jake completely, to finally have something that I couldn't take away from her. She met Jake at their usual spot, a hotel bar across town where no one we knew would see them. "I have news," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. When she told him about the pregnancy, Jake's face went white. This wasn't part of his plan. He was supposed to marry me, access my family's money, pay off his debts, and then figure out his next move. A baby with Melissa complicated everything. "What do you want to do?" he asked carefully. Melissa smiled, a cold expression I'd never seen on my best friend's face. "I want you to choose me. Leave Emma and be with me and our baby." "It's not that simple," Jake said. "The wedding is in a month. Everything's planned." "Then we'll tell her at the wedding," Melissa said firmly. "In front of everyone. She'll have to let you go then." Jake stared at her, realizing that his carefully constructed plan was spiraling out of control. Neither of them knew that David and Mrs. Chen were already 3 steps ahead, preparing to turn my wedding day into their day of reckoning. The morning of my wedding, I woke up at 5 a.m. with a knot in my stomach that I couldn't explain. Sunlight was streaming through the hotel room curtains, and I should have felt nothing but excitement. Instead, I felt like something terrible was about to happen. I'd been having strange dreams all week. Nightmares about Jake running away at the altar, about Melissa laughing at me, about standing alone in my wedding dress while everyone stared. I kept telling myself it was just pre-wedding nerves, but the feeling wouldn't go away. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Today's the day, Em. Remember that I love you no matter what happens." What a weird thing to say on someone's wedding day. But David had been acting strange for weeks, asking odd questions about Jake, and looking at me with this sad expression whenever he thought I wasn't watching. Melissa arrived at my hotel room at 7 a.m. with coffee and pastries, looking absolutely radiant. Her skin was glowing, her hair was perfect, and she seemed more excited about my wedding than I was. "Ready to become Mrs. Jake Morrison?" she asked, setting down the coffee and giving me a hug that felt different somehow, tighter, almost possessive. "I think so," I said, trying to shake off my weird mood. "I just feel nervous for some reason." "That's totally normal," Melissa said, but there was something in her voice that sounded almost satisfied. Every bride feels nervous on her wedding day. As we got ready, Melissa kept checking her phone and smiling at messages. When I asked who she was texting, she said it was just her mom asking for updates about the wedding. "She's so excited for you," Melissa said, but she was still smiling in that strange way. At the church, Mrs. Chen was setting up her equipment with unusual intensity. She had cameras positioned everywhere, more than seemed necessary for a normal wedding video. When I asked her about it, she just said she wanted to capture every moment of my special day. "Trust me, Emma," she said, adjusting a camera near the altar. "This will be a wedding video you'll never forget." David arrived early and kept pacing around the church like a caged animal. He was wearing his groomsman tuxedo, but he looked more like he was preparing for battle than a celebration. "You look beautiful, Em," he said when he saw me in my dress, but his eyes were sad. "I just want you to know that whatever happens today, you're strong enough to handle it." "David, you're scaring me," I said. "What do you think is going to happen?" "Nothing," he said quickly. "I just want you to be happy, that's all." Jake arrived at the church looking nervous and sweaty, which wasn't like him at all. Usually he was calm and confident in any situation, but today he kept checking his watch and looking around like he was expecting something bad to happen. When he saw me in my dress during our first look photos, he barely smiled. "You look great, babe," he said, but his voice sounded flat and distracted. "Are you okay?" I asked. "You seem weird today." "Just wedding nerves," he said, the same thing Melissa had told me. "I'll be fine once we get through the ceremony." But he didn't look fine. He looked terrified. As guests started arriving, I noticed Melissa and Jake exchanging glances across the church. Quick looks that seemed loaded with meaning, like they were communicating in some secret code. When I mentioned it to my mom, she just said I was being paranoid. "Honey, you're about to marry the man of your dreams," Mom said, adjusting my veil. "Stop looking for problems where there aren't any." But there were problems. I could feel them in the air like electricity before a storm. Mrs. Chen did one final check of her equipment, making sure every camera was recording. David positioned himself where he could see everything that was about to unfold, and I walked down the aisle in my beautiful white dress, completely unaware that my best friend and my fiancé had planned to destroy my life in front of 200 people. The ceremony began perfectly. The music was beautiful, the flowers were gorgeous, and everyone was smiling. But as we reached the part where Jake and I were supposed to exchange personal vows, I saw Melissa take a deep breath and step forward. This was it. The moment that would change everything. And I was ready for it. The screen behind the altar flickered to life, and the first image that appeared was a photo of Jake kissing another woman. Not Melissa, but someone else entirely. A brunette I'd never seen before, taken just 2 weeks ago outside a restaurant downtown. The church gasped collectively, but this was only the beginning. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent church, "let me introduce you to the real Jake Morrison." The video continued, showing a compilation that David and Mrs. Chen had spent weeks putting together. Bank records appeared on screen showing Jake's massive debts, over $200,000 owed to various creditors, including some very dangerous people. His real estate license suspension documents flashed across the screen, along with police reports from his previous victims. "Jake has done this before," I announced, watching his face turn pale as he realized what was happening. 3 other women, all successful, all trusting, all left financially ruined after he disappeared with their money. But the most devastating part was yet to come. The screen showed security footage from the hotel where Jake and Melissa had been meeting. Clear images of them entering rooms together, kissing in elevators, holding hands in the parking lot. The timestamp showed these meetings had been happening for months, sometimes on the same days Jake was telling me he was working late. Melissa's face went white as she saw herself on screen, but the worst was still coming. The audio began to play, recordings David had made using a device he'd hidden in Jake's car. Jake's voice filled the church, crystal clear and unmistakable. "Emma's just a means to an end," his recorded voice said. "She's got family money, and she's stupid enough to trust me completely. Once I get access to her accounts, I can pay off my debts and disappear." The church erupted in shocked murmurs, but the recording continued. "What about Emma's feelings?" Melissa's voice asked on the recording. Jake laughed coldly. "Emma's feelings don't matter. She's boring, clingy, and way too trusting for her own good. You're the one I actually want to be with, Mel. You're beautiful, exciting, and you understand me." Melissa's recorded voice responded, "I can't wait to see her face when she realizes her perfect life is a lie. She's always had everything handed to her. The job, the family, the happiness. It's my turn now." The church was completely silent except for the sound of my mother crying in the front row. Jake tried to run toward the exit, but David was ready for him. My brother stepped into the aisle, blocking his path. Going somewhere? David asked. At that moment, 2 police officers entered through the back doors of the church. David had contacted them earlier in the week, providing all the evidence of Jake's financial crimes. "Jake Morrison, you're under arrest for fraud, theft, and identity theft," one officer announced, pulling out handcuffs. Jake's charming mask finally slipped completely. "This is insane," he shouted as the officers approached him. "Emma, you're making a huge mistake. I love you." "No," I said calmly. "You love my bank account. There's a difference." As Jake was led away in handcuffs, struggling and shouting about how this was all a misunderstanding, I turned to face Melissa. She was standing frozen in her bridesmaid dress, tears streaming down her face. "How could you?" she whispered. "I thought you loved him." "I loved who I thought he was," I replied. "But I've known about your affair for 3 weeks, Melissa. David showed me the evidence, and I've been planning this moment ever since." "But the baby," she started to say. "We'll be better off without a father who's a criminal and a mother who betrays her best friends," I finished. Melissa ran from the church, pushing past guests and sobbing loudly. I never saw her again. As the chaos settled, I stood at the altar in my beautiful wedding dress, surrounded by family and friends who truly loved me. My dad came up and hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," he said. "That took incredible strength." Mrs. Chen approached with a smile. "I got everything on camera. This will be the most watched wedding video in history." David wrapped his arms around me. "Are you okay, Em?" I looked around at the faces of people who actually cared about me. My parents, my real friends, my protective brother who had saved me from the biggest mistake of my life. "I'm better than okay," I said. "I'm free." 6 months later, Jake was sentenced to 5 years in prison. I started my own marketing company and never looked back. Sometimes the best thing that can happen at your wedding is not getting married at all.